Hey there. In this one, we're going to talk about why I'm not buying one of the first R2s, but I think it might be a good idea for you to buy one of them. Let's get into it. Put simply, I think the R2 is nearly perfect, but I'm not going to buy it, at least not yet. I'm going to wait for the version of it that has LiDAR, but I don't think that you should wait for it. When Rivian first announced that the LiDAR was coming on R2, it was at their Autonomy Day in December of this last year. And honestly, it kind of took a lot of people by surprise that while a lot of companies are taking sensors, Tesla, off of the car, Rivian is adding more sensors on. So the later version of R2 is going to have LiDAR, it's going to have radars, it's going to have cameras, it's going to have all of that stuff. We first learned about the LiDAR at the AI and Autonomy Day that Rivian hosted back in December of 2025. But the version of the R2 that we're getting right now doesn't have the LiDAR. It essentially has the same autonomy system that is already shipping in the R1 Gen 2. It's slightly different, and we'll get into that in just a second. But coming later, either late this year or early next year, Rivian is going to start putting the Gen 3 autonomy system with LiDAR in the R2. And a lot of people are wanting to wait for that. But honestly, I don't think it's going to make as much of a difference as people think that it will. The Gen 2 autonomy system that's shipping in the initial R2 is pretty nearly identical to what we have in the R1 already. It's driven by two Nvidia Orin chips, and it has 55 megapixels worth of cameras around the vehicle. The cameras have been slightly upgraded on the R2, so they have a little bit more dynamic range, but the resolution is exactly the same. So it is a nearly imperceptible upgrade to the cameras, but it's slightly different. It's not really anything that's going to move the needle in a significant way. The biggest differences are, number one, they added a full color RGB camera inside of the cabin. So you get an extra 10 megapixels out of that. So now it's 65 megapixels of cameras on the R2. Again, it's a small improvement, nothing that's really going to change the needle on its own, or move the needle on its own rather. And there are 5 radars around the car. There's a front center radar that is like a 2D imaging radar. That's actually not that common in the world of vehicles today. And then it has 4 corner radars. And on the R2, they're actually using those corner radars for dual purpose as parking sensors. But again, these are all just like very small things that don't really move the needle. It's sort of a Gen 2.5. For all intents and purposes, it should perform nearly identically to the Gen 2 system that's currently in R1. The Gen 3 system that's coming later on in the R2 is a little bit more robust. The two big differences is, number one, it's going to have a LiDAR sitting on top of the windshield. And honestly, I feel like they've done a fantastic job with this LiDAR. It's not one of the big crazy spinning things that you're used to seeing like on a Waymo vehicle, for example. It's actually a very compact and pretty well hidden unit that sits above the windshield, and you honestly probably wouldn't notice it as just an average bystander. The other big difference is the RAP1 chip. This is a new processor that was made by Rivian for Rivian Autonomy Systems. And this new Gen 3 computer more than doubles the compute power that we had in Gen 2. It has 1,600 TOPS of AI performance. That stands for trillion operations per second. It's just a metric to kind of compare the systems against each other. But it is hugely more powerful and provides a lot more compute headroom. And while this is super impressive, I don't think it's actually going to make as much of a difference as people think that it will. In order to understand why that is, we need to look at why Rivian is putting LiDAR in the first place. Rivian right now really needs to catch up in autonomy in a big way. The only major player in the US market for autonomy is Tesla, and they are light years ahead of everyone else. And RJ Scaringe has made no secret of the fact that he feels that in the future, whether a vehicle has good autonomy or not is going to be a make or break decision for consumers. And so he wants to have Rivian ready for that. And they have autonomy firmly in their sights. And they're putting the money where the mouth is. They have been spending a lot of time and money investing in a good autonomy system. But the truth is, they're behind when compared to the competition, and they need to catch up in a big way to make a compelling product. And so far, they've done pretty well, but there's a lot more work to do. And that's where the LiDAR comes in. These systems use primarily cameras to drive. Tesla's a great example of this. They have only cameras on the car. And even in Rivian, where there's more sensors that we have radars all around the R1 Gen 2 as it speaks, it still uses the cameras for most of the heavy lifting. But you have to train the computer how to understand what's coming from the cameras, and they need other sensors to help accelerate that training. And the LiDAR is a huge tool for that. So when you have a vehicle like the R2 with mass market appeal that lots of people are very interested in, and Rivian wants to sell tons of them and have them all over the road, you have kind of a golden opportunity. If you spend a little bit of extra money and put LiDARs on all of these cars that are going out into the world, they're going to be able to collect a ton of data with those LiDARs that they can use to train the cameras even faster. And that is why I think primarily they're putting the LiDAR in R2. And sure, there is a certain amount of functionality that those vehicles will get, but the number one priority, at least right now for Rivian with those LiDARs, is to train their AI model. And what's good about that is the model that they're going to be running is both on Gen 2 and Gen 3 autonomy vehicles. So even if you drive an R1 Gen 2 or you drive one of the early R2 vehicles, it's going to be running the same model. So this LiDAR is going to improve the driving for all Rivian vehicles Gen 2 and newer. And you bet I'm going to be testing this. And I'm actually going to start doing a standardized test loop so that we can see how much Rivian is improving version by version, because already they've shown that they're moving very quickly. So if you're interested in keeping up on those comparisons, hit subscribe, because every month Rivian is releasing a new version, and I will be testing every month to see what things change and what they improve. Because if we're going to follow the trajectory they've already been on, they're at a lightning pace and things are going to be changing very quickly. And that leads me to why I don't think that you should wait for the Gen 3 hardware. As it stands right now, Rivian has a really good trajectory planned even for the Gen 2 vehicles. In a recent interview that RJ did with Kyle from Out of Spec, I'm going to link that video down below, by the way, if you want to see that interview. It's very interesting. But RJ talked pretty openly about what the plans are for upcoming autonomy. By the end of this year, 2026, they're targeting point-to-point self-driving on current Gen 2 vehicles, and that includes the R1 and the R2 that's coming with the Gen 2 hardware in it. And this is before the LiDAR even starts shipping. This is going to essentially be sort of a competitor to Tesla's FSD, where you need to be paying attention to the road, but you will be able to type in a destination in the GPS and the vehicle will drive you from point A to point B. Of course, you shouldn't base your purchasing decisions on promises of the future. Promises can always be broken, timelines can always be pushed back, and we've seen that much with Rivian. However, in my personal experience with my R1 Gen 2, they have moved very quickly, and it has made a huge leap in performance and capability. And if that trajectory is anything to go by, it gives me fairly high confidence that they'll probably be able to fulfill on those promises. Hopefully they can keep to the timeline, but again, you shouldn't buy solely based on promises of something that may or may not come true. But I have a fairly high degree of confidence personally, and I think it's only going to go up from there. I'll make a future video talking about the timeline and the specific features that are coming with Rivian's autonomy suite, but I think we're going to be set up to have really good functionality on Gen 2. I think it'll be a long time though before the Gen 3 hardware with the LiDAR will start to pull away in functionality. Because the truth of the matter is, it's all going to rely on data collection, and the data collection takes some time. Just like when R1 Gen 2 launched, we didn't actually see the in-house autonomy system get turned on until close to a year after they launched the platform. And I think we're going to see something similar with the LiDAR. The LiDAR will start collecting data immediately that will benefit the driving model on the non-LiDAR models and LiDAR models alike. However, it'll still take, by my estimation, and this is just a guess, but by my estimation, another 6 to 12 months before they have enough training data to actually start using that LiDAR for more functionality beyond what the Gen 2 system can do. So it very well could be that if the LiDAR launches, early 2027, it could be late 2027 or even 2028 before the Gen 3 autonomy system actually starts to have functionality that the Gen 2 system doesn't. And that's why I think for most people, it doesn't necessarily make sense to wait for the Gen 3 LiDAR equipped R2. We have a ton of functionality already that's happening with the Gen 2 system. It'll be years away before we even start to see a divergence. And it's quite possible that the prices will start to go up when the LiDAR comes out. I don't know that for sure. I hope that's not the case, but I could see that happening. As far as why I'm not buying the first R2, for me, it doesn't really make sense since I already have an R1 with Gen 2 autonomy hardware that presumably is going to perform nearly identically to the Gen 2 hardware that's in R2. And since I already have that system, it makes a lot more sense for me to wait until the R2 with the Gen 3 hardware comes out. I'll do a future video where I talk a little bit more about the full timeline and the capabilities that Rivian has advertised with their Autonomy Plus platform. And additionally, Rivian has actually agreed to give me an early look at what exactly the software experience is going to be like with and without that Autonomy Plus subscription. That's going to be coming later this month because come April 4th, the Autonomy Plus subscription is going to start costing some money. So if you're interested in seeing that, get subscribed. That's coming soon. But in the meantime, thanks for watching. Also, real quick, if you're buying a Rivian, use my referral code down below. You'll get free charging on the Rivian Adventure Network, and you'll get some points to the gear shop. Pretty cool. Until the next one, we're just gonna do that whole thing a lot smoother and a lot better. All right, take 5,342.6. I'm not exaggerating. I'm absolutely taking 5,000 takes.